Thank you. So microorganism-based agricultural biologicals. What I'm going to talk about is more a subset of this, the sort of microbes that could be applied to control grass grub, phages that can be applied very much like an antibiotic and will take out a bacteria, some fungi that can take out dandelion and buttercup and other things, fungi that can take out insects, and these happen to be the toxin from a thing called Bt. That's a bacteria that can infect a large range of insects. And if I only ever worked with this one, my life would be easy. I've never actually worked with this one. Bt is an absolute ideal candidate if you're going to use a microbe in agriculture. It's the sort of microbe that when life gets tough, it forms a spore, and no matter what you throw at it, it still survives. And when conditions are appropriate, it revives and goes on and does what you want it to do. Most of the sorts of microbes we could use in agriculture don't fall under that best case scenario. Most of the microbes we've found that have a use in agriculture can pretty much just die very easily. They're fragile things that require the right conditions to hang around for long enough. So the sort of microbes that can take out grass grub, if you expose it to too much UV light or it dries out, it will die. The sort of fungi that can take out insects, you have to have them at the right stage of their life cycle, whether it's a spore or some other material. Phages, likewise, which go on and infect bacteria, will be causing problems in horticulture. They too are fragile, and most of these things are not able to handle the great sterilizer in the sky, the sun, or being dried out, or excessive heat. And by that, I mean 25, 30 degrees for any exterior period of time, like a day or two. Just as an aside, lecturing about this grass grub here 10 years ago was my first introduction to students using artificial software, using software to cheat in an assignment. I didn't know it at the time, but I lectured about how this is a normal grass grub on the left, and on the right is one that's got what's called amber disease. It's been infected by a bacteria that stopped it eating. Its gut is empty, that's why it looks nice and amber in color. It's got an empty gut, and it'll go on and starve, die, and create a little nice gooey pool of nutrients for the bacteria to grow in. Amber disease. I lectured for a colleague, gave an assignment or an exam question. They got back in touch with me and said, "What's this golden syndrome you mentioned?" Golden syndrome, I couldn't remember what was golden syndrome. That's what the anti-plagiarism software had done to swap amber disease to golden syndrome. So I've always kept my eye out for little examples like that. Usually often only in hindsight you figure out what they've done. I would have gamed the system the same way when I was their age if I could have. Now, if you go and Google microbial products in New Zealand for agriculture, look at an image thing, this is what you get now, which is encouraging. Even 3 or 4 years ago, I would have got a whole lot of different products, images of the bottles and packages and stuff like that, and the brands that are out there, and not a lot of images of basically people talking about or thinking about or how the context within which they're using them. So I do think this is reflective of a change and a better awareness of these sorts of products, and that people are considering them as an alternative to your regular agri-chemicals far more now than, say, 5 years ago, certainly a generation ago. They've been around a long time though, but like most innovations, there's a lag period and then things take off, and there's a few hiccups often along the way. But why would you use them? Like anything in agriculture, it's probably going to claim increased yields, increased crop yields. Let's take that as a given. Nobody's going to sell anything, hey, buy this, it'll do nothing. but there are plenty of things like that out there on the market. Reduced chemical dependency, undeniable. Environmental benefits, I say yes and no. I'll come to a point about that. And economic advantages. The economic advantage I see is that unlike agri-chemicals, these things can go on and self-replicate, like a sci-fi episode of Star Trek or something, or Star Wars, that if you have them in the soil, you don't need to add them to the soil. If you have to add them to the soil and your conditions are right, they can go on and persist. The one for controlling grass scrub can, if the thing is absent in your soil and the grass scrub gets out of hand and then the microbe gets back in, it's definitely going to be around for at least the next 5 years by replicating and growing on through that population. And this is a classic bit of work out of Ag Research Lincoln. One side of the paddock here is not treated for grass scrub, and the other side is treated for grass scrub with this bacteria that can control it. And that's a persistent effect that's seen for years and years. But like most things, you could lose something, it could come back on its own, but sometimes we might need to encourage it. Not in terms of insect control, but our friend Rhizobia that sits in the nodules of our legumes. Sometimes I question why we bother adding it to clover seed. I can say that now with academic freedom. I never made comments like that when working for Ag Research because the business development managers would freak out. We're working for that seed company. I'll digress a little bit. When Anna mentioned about Ribena, I thought, oh yeah, that's high school experiment where they found no vitamin C. I'm waiting for the day where some high school students start testing some of the Rhizobia coated clover and see what's there. Rhizobia is pretty much in most of our agricultural soils, and you have to treat them pretty poorly, pretty rough, maybe 10 years of maize before you'll knock Rhizobia out of that system. We've inoculated the soils with Eurasian Rhizobia to grow Eurasian grasses. But sometimes you can lose it. Back to my friend's dying grass scrub. It's a really good case history of the development of these sorts of products, where they've been, where they've come from, what they've gone through, where they are now. So the microbe that causes this amber disease, Serratia entomophilia, first reported back in the late 80s out of DSIR days, and was looked at being turned into a commercial product for controlling grass scrub. It's very specific for grass scrub, doesn't knock out anything else. Grass scrub is a pasture pest. Even though it's a native, we've created a brilliant smorgasbord of opportunity for it. The grass scrub said, whoa, you've planted me something I like. And so it invades our pastures. So this product was developed, and it's in fuzzy there, Monsanto. Some years ago, I was up somewhere in the South Island chatting with somebody who said, oh, you're working on this bacteria that does this to grass scrub. Let me tell you a story now that the non-disclosure period's finished. So when this was being developed out of the DSIR, one of the companies that looked at developing it on into a commercial product was Monsanto, back in would have been the early, around about the start of the 90s. And Monsanto was looking at whether to get into these sorts of products or perhaps go a biotech route. We may be reading a little bit into it, but it's certainly something Monsanto was looking at very seriously 30 years ago, using these biological type products. And so it came to market with a few issues. You had to liquid ferment it. Well, that's all right, but we have a limited capacity to do that on scale in New Zealand. And at various iterations of this sort of product over its 30-year history now, sometimes there hasn't been the capacity to ferment it in New Zealand, or if there is the capacity, it's been too expensive to use. And so at some stages, this microbe has been fermented in Germany and concentrated and air freighted back to New Zealand. It's been cheaper to do it there. And that's a reflection of these sorts of products are far more common in Europe and some parts of North America and Central America than here. And there is certainly a much greater awareness involved in manufacturing these sorts of things. So we get this liquid concentrate fermented goo of microbes that required 4 degrees refrigeration to stay alive. So it's like a yogurt, probiotic. Had to be refrigerated while transported. Needed specialized applicators to inject down into the pasture because you can't just spread it on the top because the sun will kill it. And also you need to get it down where the grass scrub is. And there was a few misfortunate episodes where they realized you couldn't use town water if it was chlorinated because you just killed it. So this didn't set the scene up very well for this sort of product. Don't buy that, doesn't work. It's difficult to transport. We've only got limited operators who can apply it. Anybody who left it sitting outside in a Canterbury nor'wester for the weekend thinking that I'll do it on Monday didn't do it any favors. So a lot of really excellent work at Ag Research to how do you address this product that you have to treat essentially like yogurt and get it out on the farm and use it. What can we do? And they basically took it from a liquid product to a granular form. It's actually just kitty litter, zeolite, or fat sorber for your barbecue, but coated on to the top of the granule in a film that the microbes sort of locked into a sort of stasis. It's probably not too dissimilar to how it is in the soil while it's waiting for a microbe to come past. And this is room temperature stable for 9 months. So suddenly you've got a product that doesn't have all of those issues that were there previously, and you can drill in with a regular seed drill. Should be a winner. But it's trying to compete against all that negative memory out there of the previous product, Invade, that failed. Don't be first to market if you're going to stuff it up for everybody else. But it was always a well-liked product, particularly amongst organic growers. Well received around South Canterbury with carrot production and things like that. But still had to be drilled in. And while at Ag Research, we thought, well, can we come up with something that you could broadcast? And so we turned it into a much more spherical granule with additional layers of material of clays built up around the original core granule in there. Something that you could broadcast out, would sit there nice and stable, and when it rained, would dissolve and wash the microbe in. And that worked. And that's not why that was taken to market. It was taken to market and still applied the same way as this one by seed drill, with the added benefit being more spherical. It just flowed through the machinery quicker. What I think it was nobody wanted the risk of selling it as this easier to apply, you can just broadcast it, but still something going wrong. You know, what if you say broadcast it before it rains, but then it doesn't rain for 6 weeks? Broadcast and then irrigate, but irrigators aren't working. So there's still a risk that if the product fails, due to things beyond everybody's control, whoever sold it to you will still get blamed. So that wasn't actually on the market for long at all. And so everything sort of disappeared for a bit, and there were a few people upset, rightly, that there was no longer access to this. If you were wanting to control grass scrub, you had to use your old techniques of either trying to squash it with rollers or agri-chemicals. But there was definitely a strong core of organic growers who made it known that this product should come back. And so it turned up some years ago by BioStart in its granular form. Surprisingly, still suggesting keep it in the fridge, just a bit of insurance, because that orange container, once again, sitting in the back of your truck during a Canterbury nor'wester for a week isn't going to survive. But what I do find encouraging, surprising, and annoying is that the granule one isn't as widely available now. It's back to the liquid form requiring refrigeration. The product has come full circle, but it's being able to come full circle because people understand now how to treat these sorts of products. They're not Agri-chemicals are pretty fail-safe. You can treat them so poorly, they will still work. They're heat stable, they're stable from desiccation and things like that. And they'll hang around there until your target goes near them. But we understand better how to treat these. And also, if it's not on the front of the bottle or be on the back, don't use chlorinated water. I'm also amazed that it's taken this long to sell it to the home care, lawn care market as well. So when I was last working with this in a big way at Ag Research 10 plus years ago, it was still only an agricultural chemical, and I was surprised still walking through the garden centre that for home grass grub treatment, you're still using agri-chemicals when this one made a lot more sense. So somebody's figured out you can actually add to other markets. So there's these how we use them and the product configuration challenges or forms, our formulations. They're challenges for these products, but also two pieces of legislation. The piece of legislation that causes a headache for genetic research, for GMO researchers, the Has No Act, is also a headache for these sorts of products, because a new organism is any new organism, be it a biocontrol agent, be it a biological, that hasn't been here before. So these sorts of microbial-based products, if there's a version of a product overseas containing a microbe that you have no evidence for it being here, you can't import it to use it because of that Has No Act as well. So we're limited in what we could bring into the country and use. We've probably got microbes here that could do everything we wanted to anyway, but that's a really difficult thing to go and find a microbe that does exactly what you want. And then also, they are still treated very much as insecticides and herbicides under the ACVM Act, so you still have to go down a regular registration pathway as for an agri-chemical. Brazil looked at the issues around registration of these sorts of products some years ago, and so from 2013, so about 10 years ago, and this is a year old. In Brazil, there's probably about 500 of these sorts of products now. They simplified the registration process. They probably pushed it more towards what we'd call GRAS, generally recognized as safe, that if you had a list of ingredients and the sort of microbe you had in there was reasonably expected not to be a wide-scale problem. You're not bringing in a pathogen. We're bringing far more into the country every time we step off an aircraft, and if we swipe the sole of our foot, of new organisms than a known product coming in. And so Brazil's registration of these sorts of products has gone through the roof. That said, though, there are some awful shockers. Just because they have probably 500 products now doesn't mean they have 500 good products. Thank you. So in New Zealand, I mentioned one of my earlier slides that when I do an image search on this, I see a lot different images than I did a while ago, a generation ago. This is just three projects, sorry, that have recently received funding in the last few months, what are called smart ideas. They each get $1 million for the next 3 years to look at developing something for the sector. So that's encouraging to see that extent of level of investment by the government. And these projects will have industry buy-in or partnership, otherwise they wouldn't have been funded. And here at Otago, there's a co-led product by my colleague in microbiology, Peter Finneran, with Canterbury University, looking at using phages, which are actually viruses that infect bacteria. In this case, we're looking at ones that could infect PSA, the bacteria that infects kiwi fruit. Although after listening to Gemma's talk, I'm a little bit worried, perhaps, throwing viruses out there. But these are an alternative to antibiotics. So I find it encouraging how much investment there is now in this. The key will be collaboration. The key will be researchers working with the private sector, those who can take these through to market and scale. I can't quite tell from the font here, but international collaboration opportunities, I see problematic that our products could go out there, but we're limited on what we can bring in here. We all need to communicate how to use these much, much better and not to think of them as a direct replacement for an agrochemical. They're their own class of compound and product, and they have to be treated differently. We need to get more information and knowledge sharing out there and use as many platforms as possible. And they do have a role in sustainable agriculture, but friend Dom pointed out once, if you've used sclerotinia to control a pest in a paddock one year, don't plant lettuces the next year. So there are still some things to be aware of. Do I have a minute? I will. I evidently have a minute. I'll talk about some of the other things very quickly. This is a microbe that can basically eat atrazine. We can use these microbes to bioremediate and clean up agrochemicals. These are microbes that can dissolve phosphorus. We have a lot of phosphorus in our soil. It's an access problem. We know microbes play an essential role in that. Can we actually supplement the soil with these sorts of microbes rather than soluble phosphorus? I just left that list there to pause on in the background. There's other things I've worked on that people want to chat with me about in the break.